Okay, we are recording. Everything is good. I like that you're doing a sip of water.
Out of glass, no less, may I add.
I know. So anyway, hello everyone. Welcome to our second event at Once Club. This is our In Conversation, and today we are with Alys McMahon, who is the now current commercial director at Private Label London, and someone who I have worked with on and off, I think, I'm going to say 10 years and some change, I believe, a few different companies. But just for those who might not have been with us last week with Helen, Once Club is an amazing community that is being built for personal shoppers and stylists, built by personal shoppers and stylists, with the main purpose of encouraging connections, collaboration, and essentially giving amazing access to brands, information and resources within the world of luxury and personal shopping and I spent client experience essentially. And today we're going to be deep diving into Alys's illustrious career and her choices. She's been working at some of the most amazing companies such as Thread Styling, Net-a-Porter, also Topshop as well back in the day. And we're going to just kind of look at her journey, how she has ended up at a amazing luxury watch sourcing specialist and customization company, and you know, what her thoughts are on the industry going forward. And hopefully, well, most definitely, we will have some time for questions near the end. So, hi, Alys, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm excited for my grilling session.
Oh, good. I'll try not. I'll be easy. I'll be good cop today. For once. So, I mean, I know I gave you a little intro, but do you want to tell us a little bit, you know, who you are, what you do, and you know, what's happening?
Absolutely. So I'm Alys, as Dominic has mentioned. So I'm the commercial director at Private Label London. As Dominic's mentioned, it's a private company that sources luxury watches, and there's also a customization arm as well. So I guess I can probably talk a little bit more about that later on. But I'm actually fairly new there. I'm in my third month. Feels like the third year in a good way. But yeah, it's a really exciting move. So I'm excited to tell you a bit more about kind of how I ended up where I am now.
Awesome. And in terms of your career, so I know we sort of touched on it beforehand when we were talking, and you were like, I also want to talk about what I did before personal shopping. So which I to this day find absolutely fascinating. But just before that, I just want to give you, I was really thinking about this the first time we met, and you it was an event in Orange for Topshop, and you
I know what you're going to say.
Swanned in the rain in a marabou feather skirt. You were just oozing head to toe. It was like, oh, fashion, you know.
Which now doesn't fit even one leg, may I add.
Then we ended up going, and I remember sort of being like, oh, you know, it's a supermodel. And then we ended up staying at the same hotel, and we ended up just bonding over burgers and beer. Yeah. And I was like, oh, and you were completely the opposite of what I thought you were going to be. And I think that probably has a lot to do with all the kind of touch points of how you got to personal shopping. Is probably involved in that somehow. But I just love to know kind of how you went from sort of secondary school, I mean, college days, into kind of, I suppose, Topshop personal shopping.
I always wanted to be a fashion designer, and I wanted to be a designer of some sort. I was always interested in fashion, used to design clothes, you know, when I was younger. I was always drawing, always really interested in fashion from such a young age. And I was always very creative, but not necessarily academically so, or academically arty, I should say. And what I mean by that is that I couldn't draw, or, you know, I wasn't technically good at drawing, but always very, very creative. And I went through school. I completed my AS levels, but I didn't enjoy the sixth form environment, but I always knew that I still wanted to go on to do something around fashion. So I ended up leaving after doing my AS levels And I actually worked with my uncle for a little bit as a labourer. So he was into kind of property developing at the time, and still is. And I wanted to do it as a bit of it was a complete break from the norm. It wasn't anything to do with, studying for school or kind of exams or anything. And within the time that I was working with him, I was also putting together my own private portfolio to be able to try and get onto an access course to do a foundation degree in art design. And everywhere I went, whether I was at school, whether I was on this course, everyone was saying, you can't draw, you're not very good at drawing. Yes, you're creative, but you need to be able to draw. And I always found that a real kind of sticking point. I was like, well, I draw all the time, so why am I not getting better at it? Equally, I definitely lacked the attention to be able to develop that skill more. And I think that was almost a sign that just wasn't necessarily the thing for me. So
I'm ashamed, but it's also a shame because actually a lot of the great designers actually also did not know how to draw. And not that they'd ever tell you that at the time.
Well, I mean, even halfway through the foundation course, I'd gone through the London College of Fashion to have a look around. I was obsessed with Central St Martin's, which I did like a little 2-week course there. I think I must have been 15 or 16. I think I must have been 15 or 16 at the time, and I was obsessed. It was actually the time Gareth Pugh was studying there.
Oh, wow.
And so it was just really arty. I was always that way. And so I ended up, what happened was I did I started the foundation course in art and design at a local college to me, but at the same time I was still doing some work with my uncle as a labourer. And then we had a local Topshop open or was about to open in the town as part of a redevelopment kind of plan. And my mum actually found this article which was looking for staff basically in the local paper, and she kind of, I think she circled it or sent me a picture, or showed me a picture I should say, at the time. And I ended up applying for a position within Topshop that was always supposed to be a part-time role just while I completed my studies. But at the same time, it was a fashion related role. And the fact that Topshop was opening in my local town, aside from Tammy Girl, I think that was the most excitement that the town had seen in many years. So I was all in, went through, and the rigorous X Factor style audition process for starting at Topshop as a part-time sales advisor. I still have my original contract to this day, actually, which I keep as a keepsake. So I started on a 20-hour contract, and I was basically straddling that role as well as then studying for this foundation degree in art design. And both the college that I was studying at and Topshop were quite close to each other. But I guess the start of Topshop for me was, and this sounds really cliche to say it on this call, but there was a real sense of togetherness because this store was just opening. So it was due to open in December 2004, I think it was, and we all were hired around October. So we had this October-November time together where we had experience in other stores. We went to the warehouse to tag clothes. We helped set up the store. We had the grand opening, and it was a really, really exciting time. There was just a real sense of excitement across everybody that worked in the store. And it was a 3,000 square foot store, and I remember that because I don't know how, but it had a top man and a top shop, and everybody was just really vibrant and fun, and so looking forward to this store opening. And actually, one of my very, very good friends, that's where we met. It's a really nice kind of anecdote anyway. But yeah, so I started there, and one thing that really inspired me during my training, I guess my kind of onboarding and training at Topshop within the time before the store opened, we went to the Cambridge store, and the Cambridge was like the nearest city to where I live, and it had what I discovered was a style advisor service. And I remember talking to the style advisor, her name was Jess, and she was talking about what she did. But the funny thing was, she sort of appeared from this suite, and it was a little bit like, when you go to like a crystal ball reading or something, she sort of appeared, really cool, really well dressed, and she was just very inspiring, and really taught and spoke a lot about, I should say, spoke a lot around the service aspect of the role, and also tagging it with the fashion element as well. So that sort of was in my head, although not necessarily an avenue I wanted to go down. And then by chance, I was offered a full-time role as the shoe supervisor within the store. And one thing, I took my job at Topshop incredibly seriously. I mean, I used to show everybody around the store as if it was my own home. I mean, there's a lot to be said about there's so much pride. But there's a lot to be said. You were given this position, which was called front cover, which was basically you stand at the door, and you could make it as exciting or be as bored as you wanted to. And I always loved it.
I'm the same. I would just make it a game for myself.
Yeah, I was just like, let me get to know everything. And, and even to this day, I just remember showing people around and just really loving it, like really welcoming to people and just loving being there. And then I ended up getting this full-time role as a shoe supervisor, which was not at the front of the store. But that for me was where I learned a business within a business, and I was told, this is your mini business within a business. And for me, that was fire, so I dusted those shelves every single day. I took so much pride, and I had even throughout the rest of the store as well, but just the shoe department was then my domain. I controlled everything. I had a little book that I used to liaise with client orders for, and even though there wasn't an ordering system at Topshop in back in the day, but what you used to be able to do, I've just remembered this, is if something was sold out in a specific size, you could call the number, which was like a global kind of DC number, I guess, and you could kind of earmark the next code, like the next piece in that size to come in. So when the deliveries would come, if somebody wanted, I don't know, a black boot in a size 4, you'd request that line number with, for that specific boot, and then you would request the size, and that would arrive in the next delivery, and those boots would be for that person. So that was, I guess, the very, very early onset of managing clients, even though, sometimes the customers or clients would say, I don't want the boots anymore, and you'd have to, try and, sell them another way. But that was something that always was very fun for me, and I treated it very, like, there was a lot of admin, and I loved the admin side of it as well, kind of leafing through my book and getting to know my clients, and gradually that's how the client side developed in my mind. Anyway, the role developed so much so that I ended up dropping out of the foundation degree in art design, and I thought, what, I'm just going to pursue this Topshop career because I'm really, really loving it. And I was progressing through, I think, just like supervisors, like senior sales advisor and supervisor stage. And
the thing that they really had a training progressive culture there. So there was really like a way to kind of, work your way through the system, and you could see the opportunities, and you could kind of leverage that with, bigger stores, bigger spaces, etc., etc. But it was all kind of it was well done, I think. It was
so well done. I mean, to this day, that training program was fantastic. And everything, and the books, the books. And everybody, you had a book for every level that you were at. And everything just supported your ability to progress. It was just a really fun period of time. And I guess it was, that was the start of kind of personal progression targets, and then being really tangible. So as I kind of progressed through, I was looking after the shoes. I also half moonlighted as a visual merchandiser, which I think everybody did, and I think you and I did the very same thing at the very same time without knowing each other in very different stores for a period of time. And I had to change the mannequins one day, and I more or less changed the mannequins as if they were like my girl squad. So I basically dressed them all like me, because I was like, everybody wants to wear this crazy outfit. And I remember my manager at the time came down, and she said, basically, like, completely, tore it apart in terms of what I'd done. She sort of said, I mean, she was very constructive, but more or less, this is this is not how, it's visual merchandising. It's more general versus, there's more of a stylistic eye, but it's not personal. Have you considered personal styling? And it was then that I thought, I remember Jess from the Cambridge store that I'd met when I was onboarding, and style advising, and love it. The fact that I loved the people side of what I did, and the fact that I just loved the personal service side. I then started looking down the career of style advisor at Topshop, and that was then my goal for the next kind of 6 months to 9 months before I got the position.
So what was your first position? Was it High Street Ken or was it Brent Cross?
It was Brent Cross.
Oh, so you took the job that I applied for. That's fine.
I think we've had this conversation. so I applied, but I remember in my head pretending like Brent Cross wasn't as far as it was. Now, what I will say, it was a 2-hour drive each way from where I lived in my car, and it was actually a very quick journey, a very short journey, I should say, but not when there's traffic. And I was going at peak rush hour times. So I spent I started there I was 21 when I started at Brent Cross. And again, Brent Cross was also going through like a refresh on the store. So again, I had kind of echoes of previous years where, again, you were all together, you were kind of indoctrinated into this new Brent Cross Topshop together. You did lots of teams.
Or it was like a new lot that they had? I can't, because
it was
on that as well.
Yes, it was a new position within the I can't remember the Brent Cross shopping centre. It was a new position, multi-story. I can't remember the square footage, which is shame on me, it will come to me. But again, Topshop and Topman, and it had its own style advisor suite, and it had pink walls, which was everything. And it had a fridge which was stocked with champagne and stocked with water, and it was just so exciting. And I had to work really hard. It was myself and another girl, Charlotte, who set this up as style advisors there, and we really had to do a whole lot of canvassing to try and get this business off the ground. And there was nothing there. There was absolutely no business whatsoever. So we spent a lot of time on the shop floor, in the fitting rooms, offering to get sizes. You actually ended up doing a lot of appointments outside of the suite, because to some people, especially in the area, there was a lot of new mums, and so for them coming out, sometimes in some cases this was their first kind of shopping trip, or kind of new shopping wardrobe after they'd had a child. So it was a really important time in their lives to regain their identity and kind of just zhuzh themselves up a bit. So there was a kind of an unspoken pressure on that in some ways.
And also, personal shopping at that time wasn't really high street, so there was also the side of it being a bit unattainable.
Yeah.
A little bit, what's the word? It could be intimidating for some. It didn't feel like it was for everyone. So when you was like, hey, come, they was very like, oh no, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And to really get people in, like you said, it would be a lot of shop floor assistance. Next time, come and see me. There was a lot of groundwork to be done to kind of gain the rapport, gain the trust. So I mean, for you, I mean, that was what, 2008 then? Around 2008, 2009 you were there?
So in Brent Cross I was there 2008. That would have been right. Yeah, that was correct.
So that time was really exciting as well, working at Topshop. It was sort of, the New Gen collaborations.
Unbelievably so.
You had Kate Moss doing collections, and it was the only high street store at the time that was actually really giving you the luxury market a run for its money. One of the only places where you would see supermodels, actresses wearing sort of the Chanel's and Isabel Marant and what have you with Topshop. Now I think it's like Zara is the label du jour, but then it was it was it with Topshop.
It was such a cool vibe again about everybody that worked there, and exactly that. You'd have people come in, you'd have celebs come in, and actually it wasn't ever about the celebrity status or anything for me. The service element was still very much at the heart of everything. But exactly to your point, like there was the Kate Moss collection that launched, and actually that launched back in my first store, and there were it was the first time we saw like people queuing for a launch. press outside. And this is a small local town. Like it's not, I mean, it's not that small now, but it was cool to say that you worked at Topshop, given 100%. All that, like everything was just super, super cool.
You felt like a club.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
But it was a club.
Yeah. And even, and I know you did as well, but when we we did lots of events in other stores, so you might go to another store if there was kind of a big event. So I did some work in what's known in the industry as 214, but it's the Oxford Street store, which is sadly no more. But you'd go there and you'd do some events, and there were so many things that I got involved with there as well. But again, it's that club feel, and I always found it very daunting there, because I always felt like you were kind of swallowed by the brand almost. So yes, it was cool, but there was just so much going around. You were just a very small fish in a massive pond.
I mean, absolutely. I remember at that time though, I mean, I was so obsessed with my work. I mean, they had me because I'd spend my days off going to shop the 25% discount that I was spent, you know what I mean? Like I was going there on my day off to shop at Oxford Street.
Yeah.
Because it was obviously bigger collections, and then it was also the vibe as well. Like you didn't know who you were going to bump into. I mean, one day I went there and I was in a changing room. I knew one of the girls was like, "Oh, come in here, come in the style advisor room." So I was changing in one of the rooms, and I could hear this couple trying on jeans. And then I realized, oh, he's trying on the jeans because Top Man weren't doing very good skinny jeans at the time.
Right.
So all the cool boys used to wear.
It was a thing. It was a thing. Yeah.
Right. And then there was those impossibly tight ones that only boys could actually wear. The X ones. Do you remember? They were so tight.
Goodness,
and she's like, "No, try those on, babe. Try those on." Blah blah blah. And I've come out to buy my item, and then it's only Kate Moss and Jamie Hince. And I was like, he bought some Marthas. I was so excited.
I love it.
It was fun. So how do you get to like Topshop to like Net-a-Porter? I mean, I know, but for everyone else.
So I actually was made, my role was made redundant at Topshop 2 years in a row. So the first year it happened and they wanted to cut the role down to only one style advisor in Brent Cross. And the other girl that I was working with, she actually was having some kind of personal health issues. So at the time she decided she was going to leave and then I would keep the job. So there was, there wasn't any kind of animosity around that. The second year that it happened, it was almost a year, like a dead on 12 months kind of following that period, that it then happened again. Now, I was very, very fortunate to have a very good area manager and a very good store manager at Brent Cross at the time that helped me with new positions as well as my CV, which is absolutely critical. If you're ever at a point, even if you don't go into a position like that, but if you're ever in a position like that, I would definitely strongly advise having someone absolutely critique your CV to the point where it's almost cringy to hear, but it's so necessary. It was one of the biggest lessons that I learned.
Me too. And not a lot of people know how to ask for that or need to, but actually sometimes you need to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to be, I interviewed and was able to get a position as the deputy brand manager of the Knightsbridge store, which 6 months previously had also just reopened as a brand new store on Brompton Road. So right opposite Harrods. And that was the first, I guess, kind of true luxury geographical space, I guess, that I had gone into. So yes, I'd been to Harrods, whenever, but actually to have a position on Brompton Road at a Topshop there was also fairly powerful at the time. I mean, I remember we had to phone, and I did it many times as well. We had to phone Philip Green every evening after the store closed to tell him what we'd done, the money we'd done, the figures and everything. And you would be sweaty palms, you'd be sweating before this call, and it was only ever a 3 or 4 minute call, going through numbers, but you better have made sure you knew their numbers upside down and inside out, because if you said something that he wasn't expecting, you'd need to explain it. And you just, the aim was you wanted to get on the phone and off the phone in the shortest amount of time, because he was a scary guy. But I mean, you know, from a luxury space perspective, I guess that was kind of geographically what was very exciting about the Brompton Road store, was that you had clients who were shopping at Harrods and then crossing the road and come into this still very cool club type cult of a brand, Topshop, with, you know, to get kind of high street pieces. And within that store there were elevated pieces. You know, there were different lines that Topshop did based on, you know, kind of different design premises. So like Topshop Boutique, Topshop Unique at the time, which was the brand that showed on at London Fashion Week every season. And so that was where I started to get to know a little bit more about luxury. But actually I have to say that geographically for me, I lived very, very far outside of West London, and I wanted to do something that, you know, I'd spent the last however many years traveling an obscene amount for work, and I absolutely would never change it for anything. But I think at that point I started to just realize, right, what is it that I love? I'm in retail, I love service, I'm getting more interested in this luxury space. What can I do next? Like, where can I go? Am I always going to be in retail? Am I gonna kind of go up through management in retail? What I felt like I wanted something else, and actually that something else came in the form of Net-a-Porter. And I remember going onto the website and seeing a fashion advisor position. So this was a position that was very similar to, I guess, the style advisor position in Topshop, but everything was online. So Net-a-Porter at the time had been going 10 years, I think it was at the time.
Yeah,
when
it was really well known at that point, I suppose, because Richemont had essentially bought the company.
Yes,
talking about the £50 million that it was bought for, and then they also moved offices to their main offices to Westfield. So everyone was talking about 2010 for sure.
Yes, yeah.
So the transition from kind of going, like you said, from like shop floor retail to personal shopping online, or in fashion advisor type thing, you're giving advice, but it's all new, it's a whole new world, right? It was completely different in some ways, apart from the only thing I think that was the same was talking to a customer, but like everything else around it was completely different.
Well, everything was kind of glossy and just shiny, and you sort of felt like you were working at a Vogue office. And I know probably people don't know this, but me and you ended up starting at Net-a-Porter on the same day in the same team without knowing each other. So we had always worked within each other's kind of Topshop area, or you know we knew of each other, but we hadn't met properly. We'd met that time in that event that we did together.
And it was like the weekly call, the style advisor call. Yeah. And that was essentially the extent of like what we knew about each other.
That was it, yeah. So for me, when I joined, I remember just being, you know, again, you know, I think the love of fashion and the ability to play dress up and kind of just have fun, like just be like, okay, we're going to this, you know, new brand. It's, you know, it's everything's done online. For me, the fact that the service element, I could really develop my own service skills within that role. And what I loved about it, and I still say this to this day, is that there are no preconceptions about how you look. There is no prejudgment. You know, when, you know, there was definitely times when I was at kind of various stores, and especially because I was kind of bohemian and a little bit wacky, that actually that as a style advisor in Topshop, giving people advice, especially someone who's come in and, you know, they're not necessarily sure of what they want. Actually, your physical appearance can, you know, as we all know, says so much, but actually sometimes it worked against you because you'd made a choice on certain things, but you sort of almost wanted to have sort of a like a preface where you're like, this is not how you'll turn out after our appointment with me. So I absolutely loved the development days of the Net-a-Porter days with, you know, within that role. And again, I mean, I'm sure you'd say the same, Dominique, that it felt like you were in a club.
Yeah.
Like there was just this really cool way they had of really like looping you in. And I was thinking about this today, just for our call. You know, that's something that's really something that I have to be thankful of within all of the roles that I've had. And you sort of alluded to it earlier, that I've been lucky to be in places that have had this hype about them. And actually, I didn't join because of the hype. It kind of happened whilst I was there. And, you know, I mean, knowingly or not knowingly, I don't know. But you know, for me, it felt, again, it sort of felt like you were part of another club. So that for me was
gravitas with Net-a-Porter.
Yeah.
Where, you know, you told people that, oh, Net-a-Porter, all of a
Yeah.
sudden people thought you were quite serious and,
Oh, for
and also
sure.
quite glamorous. And I was like, if you knew what I had for lunch today, glamorous. But no, totally. And I think, I mean, for you, just because I want to get onto thread styling and private label, but is there any like specific, you know, moments at NAP that you like remember, like that really stick out to you just within that part of your career? Because it's such a learning curve of that whole service journey, you know, learning about clients, really taking that shop floor personality and putting it onto an email or onto a call, and then having to make sales, and also having to make sales with tens of thousands of pounds that you would never, you know, a good sale at Topshop before might have been like $1,000, right? Like, not so much at a 214 level, but at our regional store level. So to go from that, and I remember one of the most expensive things that on the website in 2010 was the Alexander McQueen cape. It was £28,000, and I was just like, what? So is there anything that sticks out to you that you were just like, that's when I was like, this is
I mean, one thing, I mean, throughout my Net-a-Porter career, so when I guess after the fashion advisor stage, I moved into a personal shopping advisor stage, which was almost a bridge between, and Helen mentioned this on the call last week, when there was a restructure within the fashion advisor and customer care team, then this kind of bridge role was developed, which I'm pretty sure we interviewed for. And it was not a fashion advisor, but not a fully fledged shopper. And you sort of, it was a personal shopping advisor, and it's sort of, you sat on kind of, I guess, the lowest rung. I don't mean that derogatory, but you basically sat on as an entry junior level personal shopper that, you know, you had a list of clients that were given to you. You started having quite, not aggressive targets, but certainly kind of ramped targets that you had to work towards. And then of course you moved into the Westfield office, which, you know, compared to the distribution center in Charlton, which is where they distribute everything, you know, you were then, as a personal shopping advisor, you were then going into kind of the big wide world of kind of editorial space, I guess,
and press and the editorial and the style. And again, like you said, it's that Vogue office vibe.
Oh my goodness. 100%. I mean, you witnessed the outfits, you know, the dresses, the heels, just because you could, you know. And I guess one of my, for me as a kind of an innate salesperson, you know, I made some pretty decent bonuses based on, you know, some really cool kind of, you know, business strategies that I had internally or did internally as a shopper with my own clients. But I think it was just there was always something going on. There was always something that was fun to kind of get involved with, or, you know, kind of be a part of. So I can't recount kind of one thing, but definitely, you know, from, you know, it really did help me to kind of get to my next step in my career within that position, and just really cement what I wanted to be in. And actually that Net-a-Porter was where I absolutely understood, and this is how thread styling came around, was where having a service that catered solely towards actual service versus just e-com and a retail model really came into its own. And that's where it got quite exciting. And there were elements, and again, we worked together at Net-a-Porter within personal shopping, and there were elements of what we'd started doing in terms of cultivating relationships between different departments and being the voice of the client, and being able to relay that to these big stakeholders and these huge teams that actually, you know, globally and kind of, you know, within the industry, they're the guys that kind of dictate the rules, you know. But actually what I felt, and I know we talked about this before, is that you felt that there was a tide changing, and the tide was the client is the person who is going to dictate how the next 10 years are going to look for retail models.
100.
So that's kind of how threads came around, actually.
So for those who don't know what thread styling is, how would you describe thread styling as a business model?
Thread styling is it's a media platform that creates beautifully created editorial content, and also has a chat commerce platform in order to be able to service clients who come in requesting the product from these editorial curations. So it's social media first. So Threads started on Instagram and Snapchat actually, and they release the editorial content regularly through grid posts and stories as well. And before Insta Story, it was actually Snapchat. So the chat platform element of it is the sales team that I became a big part of, and was really able to drive in the last kind of 5 years before I moved on.
And when you joined, I remember sort of calling you and sort of being like, how is it? What do you think? And you were like, we just hired our 9th person. And it was a tech person, so it was a big deal. You were so happy. So, I mean, going from like a huge corporation like Net-a-Porter, and then going to something that's so small scale and so kind of, essentially it was that, I suppose, what it would have been like when, say, Helen started Net-a-Porter, right. It was bare bones, you were figuring out the structure. I mean, what was that like? Like, where do you even, like, as a, like you said, innate salesperson, like, where did you start?
I mean, it's a really good question, and it's definitely taken some time to digest, because especially given that I've moved from there quite recently, part of my kind of, leaving, and, and I'm certainly still in touch with them and will always be. But part of that is kind of understanding, what were my biggest highlights there? And actually, I guess, the overwhelming sense of you just always knowing that you were building a business. Now, that wasn't necessarily a personal shopping business, because at that age and size of the company, you were really involved in very many different things. You'd have a different hat on every hour, depending on what you needed at the time.
That was the right, because you got to do something different every day, and you got to be involved with the process, rather than being in a big corporation where they were telling you after they built it, and then and then telling you this is what you're doing, even though you hadn't considered it at all.
Yeah. And actually, to kind of jump back to Net-a-Porter, I mean, what I actually ended up doing before I left Net-a-Porter was finding ways to try and enable shoppers in my team to be able to sell better, whether that was kind of via, and you'll probably remember this, whether that was via, the kind of the tech platform. So trying to help with the editorial editorial content that was going out to private clients kind of on a weekly basis. I spent a lot of time with the tech department to try and refine, that process. I remember counting clicks with my mouse. So I think it was 37 clicks to show a client one pair of shoes. And for me, I was like, there's got to be something more. Like, we've got to be able to do this easier. So I took a lot of that to Threads, in the sense that we know, I already strongly believed in the premise that Threads was, i.e. servicing, having luxury service at the forefront of a client base, and being able to fulfill everything they need and not say no. And actually, that was a catchphrase at Threads, and that's the one that made it into the first Vogue article, which was a proud moment, which is, we never say no, there's always an answer. And at Net-a-Porter, and I know we've talked about this a lot, there was a lot of no. You'd have a very good client, it didn't matter how much they spent, but you're on the phone to these clients all day and constantly, and they might want to spend £10,000 on a Marchesa gown, and they might need it in a specific size that wasn't part of the regular buy. So the length and the hoops that you had to jump through to try and get a specific pre-order buy on that piece was very, very challenging. And with Threads, Threads doesn't hold inventory, so it was a blessing and a curse in some ways, especially as we grew, that as a shopper and as a salesperson, whilst I didn't move over as a shopper to Threads, you could sell anything. There was nothing to say you couldn't do anything. And I mean, even to this day, they've sold residencies, they've sold boats, they've sold cars, they've sold,
Victoria's Secret tickets.
Victoria's Secret tickets, yeah, absolutely. Like they're a big,
I believe, for Play Pit.
Yeah, they're big pieces. I forgot about the stand. They were, and that was it. It didn't matter the value. You were servicing a client base really fully. Yeah. So that's, I guess, there were definitely elements of, for me, I always loved what I did. If anyone ever asked me what I do, especially trying to explain the service or the job to outside of anybody in the industry, it sounds really cheesy, but I used to say, well, I get paid to like, I get paid to like enjoy myself every day. Like I genuinely loved every second of it. And there were moments, as with any business, you go through periods of growth, and with Threads specifically, it went through a very rapid period of, really huge growth. And of course, and again, to touch on Helen's point that she made last week, is that when a company goes through that period, the customer is sometimes the one at the other end of it that doesn't benefit from that. And so we found ourselves in, certainly came across instances where that was the case in some instances. But, as I say, Threads had the ability to pull out all the stops in every case. So, and the Threads client is someone who, even to this day, is kept at the forefront of everything they do going forward.
I mean, the Threads client is voracious in the sense that you're always knowing exactly what they want, what their expectations are, and it's also very quick. I mean, going from like corporations like Net-a-Porter and Farfetch, in my experience, and then going to Threads and going through, like you said, jumping through hoops to get things passed, and then realizing that I could turn stuff around in 24 hours, sometimes the same day, was an insane concept. But then, like you said, you kind of felt totally drunk with power, because then you realize there's actually no stopping me, what the team can do, what we can do as a company. And again, you kind of start, you really feed into that if like you said, like your kind of innate core is about the client, because you realize that you can do loads of things, and as long as the client is telling you and willing, what's to stop us? And that was super exciting. But speaking of like these kind of huge items, one of your kind of loves or side loves within like Thread styling was watches. All the girls like jewelry and shoes, and you were very majorly focused on watches in a way that I wasn't. I liked, obviously I had to be focused on it from a managerial point of view, but essentially that was like your pet, and obviously now you're at private label. So how does that even begin? And then I want to know a little bit about sort of how do you end up like being a commercial director, a watch sourcing specialist after being a person shipping director. It's fascinating.
So watches was always something that, I mean, I loved watches even from a very young age. I've always loved watches. But again, it's not something that I've never really kind of looked into it, or kind of even, expanded on the thought. And
I remember you always buying a watch at Net-a-Porter. I was like,
oh, I know. And I look back at some of those images, and they're big old pieces as well. And so I remember, so at Threads, knowing the variety of pieces that we were selling, and to your point, there was no stopping the product that could be sold. I had an idea that I thought, what, we could actually work around sourcing watches on behalf of clients. And I remember Sophie Hill, who started Thread Styling at the time. That's my dog, I apologize. He has something to say about this. At the time, she'd sort of said, it's never going to work. It's not going to be it's not going to get off the ground. Like, there's no skill in house. There are no sources. There's no one to manage this. And I said, please just give me a bit of time on this and let me see what I can do. So this is kind of how I started. I may just have to let the dog out, but I might have to just bring you with me.
Yeah,
let me just
talk with the dog.
Hang on, let me just also, oh, hang on, he stopped. Sorry about that. He might start again in a minute. So that was something that, I said, look, just give me some time on this, and let's see what we can do. Like, yes, we don't have the skill, but a lot of, we're not fulfilling our clients' needs if we know they're buying these, but they're not buying them through us. So how can we avail of it? So I started feeding into the content plan certain watches. I made sure that all of our sales team were aware of the key watches that people were buying in the, within the market. And I just read up on loads and loads of things. I just read, I researched. I got to know the brands that were selling. I got to know what our clients were, our Threads clients were wanting. And that was something that was always, very, very kind of exciting for me as well to kind of look into. I'm just going to open the door. I'm really sorry. Can I stop my video while I just go, and I think he may need a water break.
You want to mute?
Yeah, let me mute one, and I'll be one.
So whilst we're waiting for Alice and the dog, some of the watches that used to be sold across Thread, you know, we were talking, you know, big ticket items, Richard Mille, Audemars, Patek, Rolex. I definitely remember not realizing there was a huge market for these types of watches, and that there was a real pecking order in the way that you could acquire them. Quite similar to kind of, you know, purchasing an Hermes. It wasn't as straightforward as going into the store of just buying a Patek that you wanted. There was a whole thing. So that having this whole reseller side of it, and knowing that there were people who were making a living from selling watches from other watch sellers was kind of crazy. But it was just one of the many things to be like, oh yeah, sure, why not? Because it was available, right? That's what you do. And even customized watches were something that I was so unaware of, but now it's starting to become such a huge part of, you know, do now, right, with private label.
And actually, one, you know, kind of one thing to note on all of that is that we're at Net-a-Porter together at the time when fine jewelry hadn't really kicked off. You know, online shoppers were not really, they weren't really buying luxury, high value fine jewelry online themselves. You know, that was a big ticket purchase.
Nobody thought that it could be done, so it wasn't being pushed in the right way at the time.
Exactly. So watches came about via that kind of evolution of, you know, at Threads with wardrobes, doing, you know, full on kind of couture orders for their weddings, and we were looking after this very small base of clients, but through the entire evolution of them shopping online. So a lot of people that shopped with us, I should say, started shopping maybe from the age of 18, and right the way through. We were kind of doing their graduation, we were doing their wedding, we were doing their first baby, you know. And there was a whole kind of the evolution side of where it's going with everything online is that, you know, there is different products that can start to be kind of peppered in. And so that was the point in which we said, right, okay, you know, watches can definitely have something. There's definitely something in watches. Let's try it. And it worked really, really well. And, you know, expertise was built in-house, you know, through whether it was kind of talking to people in the industry, you know, working with certain partners on, you know, kind of retail partners for certain brands. And again, the customization side for me, I see as another kind of evolution of the watch sale. So private label London came about through a very chance encounter, phone call one day back in the summer of last year. And I got talking to Daniel Henderson, who is the owner of the company, and more or less signed him as a supplier to Threads at the time for watches. And he was very receptive and understood the evolution, knowing that, you know, we understand who the client is. Now, private label London, I should say, is actually was mainly servicing businesses. So it wasn't servicing end clients. It has a very small direct client base, but actually Threads became its number one, you know, kind of purchaser, I guess, because of what we were able to do with the ability of him being able to source certain pieces, and also just having a very kind of good supply chain. So that's kind of how I ended up sort of moving from Threads, just because there was a lot more to explore, and it was more of it is a complete passion project. You know, it's a really fun. It's a really fun world to kind of develop further into. And actually, I wouldn't have necessarily seen myself going into a specific product, you know, deep dive at this stage, given the experience, like given the, you know, kind of the previous experience. But it has been quite fun.
Awesome. And so we're just sort of coming to the end. So I'll just, if there's any questions, please do write in your questions now. But just a final thing for you. I mean, you know, because I think a lot of what we've spoken about, oh, she's gone. She's left us. Oh, she's back. I think that it's always nice to kind of end with, you know, we're talking a lot about evolution, what that kind of looks like, how it's been for you throughout your career, but what that
Mhm.
could look like, you know, going forward. You know, what do you feel is the kind of evolution, you know, of the luxury market and kind of how we service our clients? Do you have any thoughts?
I think that more and more clients are looking to luxury servicing, and I don't ever think that personal shopping within a luxury space will ever end, because I think, and again, it just trickles back to kind of some of the points that Helen was making last week. Service is service, and it will always be a service. Service will always be a thing. You know, it's always, service in itself is a luxury product, regardless of what it is, right? And I think as a company, as businesses and as companies, if you can tap into understanding what those needs of the services are that clients need at that time, then I think you would have a very sound business model of it, you know, in any sense. You know, we've recognized that you know, even at private label, that clients are more interested in customization now, but actually being able to try customization on is very hard. So, you know, how can we help clients update their watch pieces, you know, in the space that we know, and especially as we know the client from the evolution of them? You know, what more can we offer them from that perspective? So I definitely think there's definitely space for it to continue growing.
100%. And if we have no questions, I have just one last one of my own, because you sort of touched on it earlier about being like an innate shopper. And one of the things that I always took away from our working partnership is that we were kind of two sides of the coin. You always seem to be a lot better at like the operational side and kind of being organized, and the logistics and the files. And I loved to deep dive. Like me, it was all like client who, you know, I knew anything. I talked to my clients all day, and then I would do the back end. And then I think so I want to know, like, what's your take on sort of, you know, being a great salesperson? Do you think it's all strategy or client? Do you think eventually you have to kind of be a bit of both?
I think it's a very good question. I think for me, I always especially how I ended Net-a-Porter, I was always very much more interested in enabling a wider shopper to do something. So for me, efficiency is key. And you know, I took a lot of that to Threads at the time. If I can help unblock a lot of these issues that shoppers are having, because I've been there myself and I understand where these blockers are, then I think that's kind of where my passion lies, and it's also where I get a lot of my kind of buzz from as well. You know, to see, you know, I lived through, especially at Threads, lived through a lot of these, you know, a lot of sales or real strong engagement developments that shoppers had with their clients at the time, because of things that I had either acted on and done for them, or worked with them to resolve, or whatever it might have been. So I think for me, I don't know, I think maybe that's just to do with how our brains are kind of, I don't know, it's just how our brains are kind of tuned in. I think you know, from your side, you're much more, you always into like the styling side. And even now, like we could talk for hours about styling. And for me, especially at Net-a-Porter at the time, it was definitely more of an ops thing. You know, okay, we've got all of these fantastic clothes and we've got a great client base, but we actually haven't got any of the tech or ops to support us being able to translate and converse with the client with all of those things. So how can we do it? And I guess, you know, that's kind of where I stand on it. It's you know,
Absolutely.
and that's,
I mean, no, you go.
that I guess that's kind of what my role is, you know, you know, where I am at private label. It's working out how we can be the most efficient with the resources that we have, and also the learns from Threads.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely will say, like, going from Net-a-Porter to Farfetch, where again, going to a place where there was a lack of infrastructure around personal shopping, and that was the reason why they wanted to kind of have a team that had experience there. I remember sort of realizing that I had learned a lot from you on that side, and kind of then realizing, and then again, even going on to other roles since, is that, you know, it's great to have all the knowledge and the references and the styling and the fashion and what have you, but to kind of continue to be successful, you have to kind of start adopting the strategy, the ops,
Yeah.
the possibilities, you know,
Yeah.
embracing that side of it. And so now I find
Yeah.
I'm much more balanced in that respect.
Yeah.
We have time for just one more question. Who or what brands are leading the way in the luxury shopping space in your mind? And that's from Rachel.
From my perspective, there are, I mean, if we're talking about kind of large conglomerates, I would say something like a Farfetch is doing very well. And I mean, Threads is a very small, Threads is a smaller version of Farfetch, right? You know, in essence.
Yeah.
So I'd say Farfetch for sure. I mean, I think the more that brands can kind of get behind some of the updates. And actually, I was watching your stories literally just before we joined and saw you'd been to Browns.
Oh yeah.
And actually what Browns are doing is also very cool. You know, you go into the fitting room, you can call for assistance, you can, you know, there's a kind of, you can do that on the mirror, can't you? Like
you basically can have your wish list, shop your wish list, and I used to do something similar. They had a put it, but it's on an iPad. On the mirror, and you can actually order everything live. It's very cool.
Yeah, and like that for me, I mean, I know Browns is linked with Farfetch, but you know, within a space where you would still go into a brick and mortar store, Browns is definitely there with that. And then I think online, people like Farfetch who are really, and I guess it's more of the kind of the business model, in the sense that I don't know how many brands now are going to be holding stock, especially given current kind of, you know, the pandemic over the last 12 months. I think it's really taught businesses, and again, it kind of harks back to, you know, the thread styling model, where you don't hold inventory, but you work really, really hard to cultivate relationships with brands directly so that you're able to access products. So you know, I do think, you know, Threads for sure is a leader within that space. Farfetch has done it on a colossal scale, and I do think that, you know, within the future there's probably going to be less there's going to be less kind of mass buying, you know, which also leads into the sustainable element of how people want to shop as well now.
Oh, totally. Well, we are sufficiently over time, but that's okay.
Sorry. It's too much to talk about.
I mean, listen, like I said with Helen, I think maybe some of these sessions will have to be parts 2 and 3, because there's just so much we could talk to you about, and you have obviously so much experience. So thank you so much for joining us and the Once Club and me on this chat. It's really special to have you as a guest and to kind of reminisce. And thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.